Hi, this is Jaume from Openfort, and I'd like to show you why Openfort is the right tool for you, the game developer that wants to integrate crypto accounts in your game. Openfort streamlines the whole operation and management of crypto accounts in your game. It makes it easy to interact with smart contract wallets, and because smart contract wallets offer new functionality that normally OS cannot offer, we basically streamline the whole user experience for your players. So I'd like to go ahead and demo what your integration workflow would be, or at least to show what is it to interact with, how is it to interact with the Openfort API. So if you go ahead here in the Openfort documentation, you can see we basically explain how is the whole architecture of Openfort, but for this demo, I'd like just to show you how Openfort structured the whole idea around players and accounts. So when you create a new player in Openfort, you get a unique ID that you can link it to your own database, basically. So anytime that you want to create a certain asset for a player, you can take this unique ID and interact with it directly. So let's go ahead and create a new unique ID for a new player. So if we go here into, for instance, Postman, here I have my unique, basically my unique keys. Let's go ahead and create a new player. So basically, you can see here is the our endpoint of players, and we take the body where we basically specify a new name and a new description. So basically, when we create this new player, we get this unique ID that you can use to link into your own database. So we go now into the Openfort dashboard. Here is the player that we just created, but this player doesn't have any account, right? So in order to create an account, we have two options. We can either interact directly with a certain smart contract, that we want, like minting an asset, transferring a certain ERC20, or any of the other options that we want, or we can specifically create an asset. In this demo, I will directly interact with a certain smart contract to create this new account. To do that, in Openfort, we have to add the smart contracts that we will be interacting with. That is quite simple. So in our case, we go in here into the Assets tab. Here in the Assets tab, we have the option of adding the contract. Here we'll be able to specify the network, the name, and the address, and we'll directly fetch the API. But let's do it. Let's continue in the previous path and do it. Let's do it directly from the API. So if you go here back into our contracts endpoint, we basically went into the endpoint of creating a contract. We specify the name of this contract, of this asset, the chain ID, and the address. So we basically hit send, and here we get the API directly from this address that we fetch directly everything on our backend. We specify if it's publicly verified or if you verified it only in Openfort, and then you get a unique ID as before. So if we go here and reload, you basically can see now that the asset that we just added, right? And so here you can see like the different functions that it has, the read and the write functions. Next up, in Openfort, in order to create transactions, because in the blockchain you have to pay gas in order to sponsor the miners and the bundlers to put transactions on chain, players usually have to have like the native token of the network they are in order to transact. With Openfort, that is no longer necessary. That is because we are using this concept around sponsoring of transactions, of the gas transactions. The way this works in Openfort, and you can see all of this documentation as well now on our page, and here we have like our own API documentation as well. We can go here into the policies endpoint, where we create a new policy. And here, basically, what we specify, as before, is the strategy that we want to pursue and the name that we want to assign to this policy. So let's go ahead this time and create this policy through our dashboard. So if we go here and we say add sponsor, we can specify the name of this sponsor strategy. So when we want to sponsor transactions, we can name it all sponsor. We want to sponsor the gas for the user, so all the gas. This is the contract that we just added, and here we specify the functions that we want to approve. So let's say I only want to sponsor the mint transaction. I save the sponsor, and so this is the one that we just created. So we also get a policy ID as we did with the assets and player. So now we are ready to create a new transaction. So to create a new transaction in Openfort is quite simple. So we go into the transaction endpoint. So we go here, transaction endpoint, and we simply have to add the different parameters that we want to. So here we have to specify the player. So let's go ahead and add the player. Then let's go ahead and add the player. It will be the one that will receive the NFT. Let's add as well the policy that we just created. So that will specify that we want this transaction to be sponsored. And then let's add last the contract that we added as well. So if you go here on the contract, right. So now let's press send. And so this what we'll basically do is send a request to mint an asset from the smart contract that we deployed in Kaka NFT, and that will basically mint that NFT into our player. The interesting part here is that we set optimistic. This basically means that when we'll receive the transaction intent before it has been confirmed on chain. That makes it for a snappier experience as well. So here you have the transaction intent. You can basically query. You can do certain pooling to basically check the status of the transaction. And as soon as it has been confirmed, then we basically populate the rest of the information, like the transaction hash, and the gas used to sponsor, to create this transaction. Here we can also see, the policy that we used and the gas that it was used to create this new smart contract on chain. What's interesting at Openfort is that we also manage for you what is the batching of transactions that is atomic. So let's go ahead and create an atomic batch transaction. So we go ahead here and we add the player and we add the account. We just click send. And this can be any set of operations that we want to be atomic from the player, right? And so here, as soon as we get a response, remember he's also atomic, so we have to also do the pooling. This is also optimistic, so we have to do the pooling to see if it worked. But this is also directly the batch transaction. We can go ahead and check the player. You can see that during the first transaction, we also created this specific account, and this account is now the default. So anytime that we interact with the player, we'll be using the default account. You can see here in the address that we are deploying this smart contract wallet on the Girly testnet. So we go ahead here. You can see if we refresh, soon enough the transaction will go into successful. So that is basically what I wanted to show in this very quick demo of Openfort. I hope that you find it interesting, and yeah, feel free to reach out with any further questions.